Hey everyone, it's Jillian and welcome back to my channel. Today we will be creating a happy birthday card using the Through the Woods die set from Spellbinders. Before we get started, I wanted to share a holiday card using the same die set. It's great when you can invest in a die set that will allow you to create different cards for different occasions, since they are at a higher price point. So we're going to go ahead and get started on our background. Off camera, I used a Royal Sovereign laminator machine along with the Deco-foiled toner sheets, paired with Gina K Designs glittering green fancy foils and the Simon Says Stamp detailed pincushion die plate. Using a laminator machine is different from the newest hot foil plates and requires a different machine to achieve this look. However, both machines will create beautiful foiled images. Currently, I have not invested in a hot foil machine quite yet, but when I do, I will make sure to create a video using the new system. Here I'm going to go ahead and trim off a little bit of the fancy foil sheet since it's a little bit bigger than the standard A2 size card that I will be creating today. Off screen, I cut my front panel from the Simon Says Stamp pincushion die plate, and I will adhere it over the foiled background using my Gina K Designs Connect liquid adhesive. So once they have been adhered together, we will go ahead and set them off to the side and place an acrylic block on top to make sure the panel stays flat when drying. I guess I used a couple of acrylic blocks to make sure that it stays flat. So now we're going to go ahead and create our scene. So now I'll go ahead and line up the two circle dies. One cuts out the Merry Christmas and the other cuts out the center circle. I use my magnetic platform to help line up the two circles so that there's even spacing all the way around, and then low-tack tape so that way it doesn't shift when running it through my die cutting machine. So when I first die cut my frame, I used green glitter cardstock, but later in the video I decided to switch that out for gold. I felt I had too much green going on since originally my truck was also going to be green, but I switched that out for red, and my trees were green, so I felt like they blended too much, and I wanted to make sure each element was a different color. So now that the base of our scene has been cut with white cardstock, we're going to go ahead and move on to our truck. The truck does come in 4 different pieces. So you have the wheels, you have the bumper, you have the body of the truck, and the tailgate of the truck. And so again, I do start by having the body and the tailgate of the truck green, but later on I do switch that to red. And for the taillights, I will go ahead and use gold cardstock, glitter cardstock, and red glitter cardstock. So using the same green cardstock, just the scraps, we're going to go ahead and cut out our trees. We're going to cut one big tree and one little tree using the same green cardstock, and we'll cut one more small tree but using a different green to make sure that there's a variation of color. So here is the lighter green cardstock that I'm going to use to cut out one of the smaller trees. So now I'm going to bring in my waffle flower stencil medium mat, I believe is what they call it. I'm going to go ahead and ink blend the edges of my die cuts, but before I do, here is the red truck that I'm swapping out for the green truck. I will be using my Distress Oxide inks to ink the edges of my die cuts. So here I have some Hickory Smoke for the bumper, using a blending brush to apply the ink. Since Distress Oxide inks are pigment and dye based, I do have a separate set of ink blending brushes dedicated just for my oxide inks. So for my darker trees, I will be using Rustic Wilderness to ink blend the edges. So once I'm done ink blending the edges, I'll use my reverse tweezers. That way I'm trying not to get ink on my fingers. And then I'll go ahead and ink blend the edges of the smaller tree, but it's still the same color as the larger tree, so I'm still going to apply the Rustic Wilderness. And then I'm going to go ahead and use Mowed Lawn to ink blend the edge of the lighter tree. And again, using my reverse tweezers to pick up, oh, missed a spot, pick up the smaller tree, clean up the green ink, and now we're going to go ahead and move on to the snowbank. And for the snowbank, I am using a little bit of tumbled glass, trying to keep the center white, but not too stark white. Now I'm going to go ahead and put the truck together, and you'll notice I did not add ink to my truck. I wanted to keep that just the plain red cardstock, first adhering the bumper and now the tailgate. And I am using Gina K's Connect glue. I like the liquid adhesive because it gives me some wiggle room. And then go ahead and add the taillights. I did find it easier to use my jewel picker to pick up the taillights and add them to the truck versus the tweezers. I felt like the lights were just too small to use my tweezers with. So, and the embellishment wand I'm using is actually from Studio Katia. I do like that one end has a wax tip, and the other end is kind of, it's not pointed, it is hollow, but it allows you to kind of move your jewels or die cuts, whatever you're using the tool with at the time. So now I'm going to go ahead and start working on the sentiment. But before we stamp our sentiment, we do need to temporarily build our scene to make sure we have enough room. I'm going to go ahead and cut out the Merry Christmas out of the frame since this is a birthday card. And it was really easy to do since there was only a few tabs connecting the Merry Christmas to the frame. And then we're going to place that down since it is the border. Now it took me a few tries to make sure that it was straight. I should have used my Simon Says Stamp grid mat. It probably would have made things a lot easier, but I just went ahead and eyeballed it and using some of the grid lines on my Misty to make sure that it was straight. So once it looked straight, another trick that I did was I actually flipped the circle over and I used my Gina K Designs amalgam ink in the color Whisper. It's a super light ink, which is actually really good for no line coloring, but I didn't want it to show through on the other side since I didn't want to die cut another circle, and that was the best ink to use to make sure that my sentiment was straight. And I'm going to go ahead and use my TaylorMade Expressions anti-static powder tool because we will be heat embossing our sentiment. I'm also using my Versamark clear sticky ink to apply my embossing powder. And then once I have really good coverage of the embossing powder off screen, I'm going to go ahead and preheat my heat tool. Oh, I did it on screen. Just kidding. Again, you want to make sure it's nice and hot before you take it to your paper, so then that way you create less warping and you don't run the risk of burning your embossing powder. And then now I'm going to go ahead and start building my scene. The snowbank die is really nice because it kind of cuts these small slits into the snowbank, so that way you can slide your trees and slide the small amount of tire into the snow. Kind of brings the scene together. I'm using my liquid adhesive to go ahead and adhere the snowbank and the trees down, but I don't want to add glue into that center line because I want to kind of tuck, and I don't tuck a lot of the tire in there, but I do add the truck tire to that area of the snow. So when you cut out the body of the truck, it also cuts a slit behind the back window, between the back window and the truck bed. So then that way you can tuck in the smaller tree so it looks like he's hauling a tree away. And then I noticed that, I guess in this card, I know on the Merry Christmas card I tucked that tire in, but for the Happy Birthday card, it looks like I did not tuck the tire in. So you do have that option. I went ahead and put an acrylic block on top while I added glue to the circular frame just to kind of hold everything in place and make sure that it adheres. My goodness, I did notice I do fiddle a lot with my die cuts. But moving on to the Happy Birthday die from Simon Says Stamp, I'm going to go ahead and cut out Happy Birthday a couple of times using the white cardstock and then one time from the black cardstock because I'm going to go ahead and glue them all together for dimension. So now I'll go ahead and cut the Happy Birthday out of the black cardstock. I like to use cardstock scraps for dimension, especially in this instance because it would be really hard to try to cut out itty bitty foam squares. And this way was easy too because I keep the base layer inside of the cardstock to make sure that the sentiment stays straight. Kind of popped in like a puzzle piece using my liquid adhesive. Another way that I could have done this too was to put adhesive sheets on there, so then that way I didn't have to use the liquid adhesive. But to be honest, with this sentiment this delicate, it was nice using liquid adhesive, so that way I had some wiggle room even though everything kind of popped into place. And then I'll go ahead and add the black cardstock on top as the third layer. And then I will go ahead and kind of fussy around with it to make sure everything is perfectly straight. And then of course when you move one area, another area moves. So again, I kind of fiddled with it a little bit. Not too bad. And then my tittle, and then I'll just pop it right out of the negative space. Carefully because it's still wet, and then I'll go ahead and pop out the insert of the B, the H, the D, and the A. You'll notice that you can kind of to the side see the white cardstock, and normally I would take a black marker and kind of go around the edges to make it seem like it was solid black cardstock, but since my card base was white, it blended in, so you didn't even really notice. But it's an option. Now we'll go ahead and repeat the same process with the happy. Using the liquid adhesive, adding the second layer on top of the base layer. And then for the third layer, we are going to go ahead and add the black cardstock, line everything up. It pops in kind of like a puzzle piece. I didn't have to fiddle with this one as much, and then gently pop it out of the negative. And then pop the centers of the H, the A, and the PP. Oh, I guess I did fiddle with it a little bit. Gosh, I guess I'm just a fiddler. My goodness. Didn't notice until I watched the replay how much I actually fiddle. So now we're going to go ahead and create our scene on our front panel, laying everything out. You could use a ruler to make sure you have even spacing, but that's just not me. I like to eyeball it. Although I do use a ruler to make sure my sentiments are straight. So I'm going to go ahead and add some foam adhesive for dimension. Normally I would cut out 3 more circles for my dimension, but for tonight I just decided to use foam tape, which is another option. Using some foam scraps for the skinnier pieces to fill in some of the gaps. And those are the new Simon Says Stamp scissors. They're great scissors. I really like them. I really like them to cut tape because they don't get any sticky residue on the scissors. And so another trick I like to do is to add liquid adhesive to the foam tape, so that way I do have some wiggle room. I notice that if I don't add the liquid adhesive, once it sticks to the paper, it was down. There was no moving things around, so that's a nice little trick. And then I'm going to line up the happy birthday, add that with my liquid adhesive. Again, that is the Gina K Designs Connect liquid adhesive, and I add that to a fine tip applicator bottle. Whoops. Then we'll go ahead and do the same for the birthday. But before it completely dries, I will bring in a T-square ruler to make sure that those are nice and straight. And because for some reason I fiddled a lot in this card, it's only fitting to fiddle again. But I'm going to go ahead and bring in my T-square ruler, and this is from my Sweet Petunia. Starting with the birthday, and then I'll move to the happy. And when I think that is nice and straight, I'll go ahead and add my dot or tittle for the eye using my embellishment wand, which I love. You could use reverse tweezers, but I really like that wax tip. It's super handy when adding small embellishments or the dots of an eye. And we'll go ahead and create a card base. It is a 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 top folding card base. And I'm actually going to go ahead and adhere this panel upside down. I mean, it's right side up, but I'm adhering it upside down. That way, if I had any extra, I could cut it off at the bottom portion of the card. If you had any extra on the top part, you could not cut it off since that is where the fold is. And then I'm going to go ahead and use some Nouveau drops. They are glitter Nouveau drops for the snow. And then I'm kind of adding them in a circular motion because if I didn't, they kind of came out looking like chocolate chips. And I didn't want a point since it's supposed to be snow. And then when it dries, it actually dries down a little bit, so they're not so dot-like. They'll dry more like the Merry Christmas card. And there you have it. Those are the final cards. I hope you enjoyed today's tutorial. If you liked today's tutorial, please give me a thumbs up. And again, thank you for taking the time to watch. And I hope you guys have a happy new year. See you next time. Bye.